So welcome to the Audit, Governance and Oversight meeting. It is Friday the 20th of June, that sounds better. The only reason I'm open is just to explain the arrangements. So the Vice Chair of the Fire Authority is automatically the Chair of the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee, and Councillor May was appointed as Vice Chair of the Fire Authority on the 19th of March 2025, and so I'm handing over to him as the new Chair of this committee.
Thank you, Amanda. I'd just like to start off by election of a Vice Chair, and I want to propose Matthew Riddle. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Anybody else want to stand for Vice Chair? No. Okay, so we confirm Matthew as the Vice Chair then. So the next item I've got on my agenda is the apologies for absence. We've had Councillor Riddle, David Powell, who's our independent member. Yes. He's presented a number of questions to us, which I think has gone out to the officers, and responses have been made. But if at all possible in your reports, if you could pick up the points that he's raised with you, that would be really handy. But we've had acceptance from Kent, me, Mohammed, Sani, Wilcox and Williams. So we're quorate this morning. I think that's really good. We've got two more people just to highlight. So Councillor Cronolly has sent his apologies as well, so he was an additional one, and we're missing Martin Williams at the moment, but he might join us later. Right, the emergency evacuation procedure.
Yeah, good morning everybody. Just to let you know, today is Friday and headquarters is normally a fire alarm test day, so you may hear it intermittently. If it does turn out to be a real incident, then somebody from reception will come up and inform us, and we'll just use the emergency exit behind me or straight in front of me to exit the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Declarations of interest, I've had none advised. So none. And public access, we've got no requests for today for public access, so hopefully we can move on. I just want to welcome everybody to the meeting. It's an important meeting for me because I'm the new boy, and under those circumstances I'm going to be ever so quiet today and just try and chair the meeting sensibly and learn from all of you, because you've got the experience that I probably need to learn as we go on. The meeting, of course, is taking place in headquarters, and it was interesting for me because it's a little while since I've been to headquarters, and under those circumstances they've moved the visitors' car park, and I was struggling to find the way in, so it was quite interesting. So I think it'd be really handy if I could get the councillors please to introduce themselves, and then I'll ask the members of staff to introduce themselves. So should we start with you, Jane?
Good morning. I'm Councillor Jane Stansfield. I represent Thornbury Ward in South Gloucestershire.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Onkar Theni, representing Coomdown Ward from Bath and North East Somerset.
Hi, I'm Councillor Tim Kent from Bristol City Council.
Yasin, representing Lawrence Hill Ward, Bristol City Council.
David Wilcox, representing Lockleys Ward in Bristol City Council.
Thank you. So we introduce the... Would you like me to put it there?
It might be
we'll start, I'll do it on the left-hand side and go around that way. Start with you, Amanda.
Amanda Brown, I'm the Clerk and Monitoring Officer at Avon Fire Authority. Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services.
Yes.
Sorry, morning everyone, I'm Sam Hawkins, Principal Consultant at RSM.
Morning everyone, Matthew Stacey, Managing Consultant at RSM.
Morning, I'm Laura Wynn-Yates, Corporate Risk Advisor.
Good morning, Helen Dunbarton, Corporate Assurance and Planning Manager.
Good morning all, I'm Simon Flood, I'm Performance and Information Manager.
Morning everybody, I'm Alison Short, Head of People Services.
Good morning, everybody. Luke Gazzard, Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Service Delivery.
Thank you very much, everybody. Can I just remind you all, because it's really, really difficult. Remember, after you've spoken, can you turn off your microphone, please? And hopefully I'll get used to that within the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you. We'll use the normal voting arrangement where we'll ask when we've got to take a vote whether there's anybody who's against or abstaining, or then finally the votes for, so that we can then move forward in a sensible way. We've got 3 reports for approval and 4 for scrutiny this morning, and potentially 2 items going into exempt session. So we've got quite a full agenda, I think, moving forward. But at this stage, can I hand over to you, Amanda, just to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of reminders, please, to members. You'll find on your desk we've left you a member interest form. David, I've got one from you already, so that's why you haven't got one. But if I could please ask if you could spare a few minutes before you leave and fill those out and hand them to Emma, then it will save us having to chase you for them, and it will just mean that's another job done. And then finally, just to advertise that the 11th of July member briefing has been postponed, so you've got some time back in your diaries. We have now rearranged that for an in-person member briefing, which is a different format, at Seven Park, on the 31st of July after PRC. So the reason I'm mentioning it here is obviously AJOP members won't be going to PRC, but we want all members, as many as possible, at the briefing. We are offering you lunch. So, woohoo! So please come along, join us for lunch at Seven Park and come to that member briefing. It's really important. It's to discuss efficiencies and savings plans and work that we're doing for the service, so that you're advised of that before later Fire Authority meetings. So if you can come on the 31st of July, we'd be really, really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So now can we do the minutes of the previous meeting? I wasn't the chair and I wasn't here. So can somebody who was, could they propose the minutes?
Can I propose the minutes, Chair?
Thank you, David. Can I have a seconder? Tim? Thank you very much. So, are they a true and accurate record? Any challenges? I won't run through them. So I'll sign those after the meeting as the official record. So, moving on to the main agenda then, the performance report, and Simon, it's pages 19 to 28, and this is a report for approval, although it's within the report it just says to note it. So, but you do want this to be approved in governance terms?
Yes, I think that's right, and apologies that wasn't
Thank you.
clear. Thank you, Chair. So good morning again, colleagues and members. The performance report that we have in front of us is presenting the full performance for last financial year. So it's from April 24 to March 25. It's slightly different from what we usually do, because obviously that reporting period has come to an end, so there's nothing now we can do to affect the outcomes of the performance. So usually members who attend these meetings regularly will know that what we do is we highlight areas of underperformance, and then the metric owner will explain to the committee what it is we're planning to do to get us back on to performance. Obviously we can't do that with this one, so really what we're doing is just reporting to you what the outcomes were and then a little bit of commentary upon them. As usual, the report is supported by 2 of our performance products. The first one in Appendix 1 is our scorecard, which details all of our corporate indicators, and the second one at Appendix 2 is our target tracker, which we produce at Avon level, which is presented to you, but also at station level, which Emma kindly sends around to members as well for your information. The target tracker at Appendix 2 is a subset of the information, if you like, at Appendix 1 in the scorecard. What we do is we use a very simple red, amber, green scoring mechanism to show whether the indicator is on target. So red indicates that it's off target, amber that it is near to target, and green to show that it is exceeding target or better than target. And I'm pleased to report, if you look at the scorecard, which lists all of the indicators, there are only 2 of our corporate metrics that have finished the financial year off target. So the first one of those is about completion of home fire safety visits, and the second one is about our sickness. So I just wanted to touch a little bit about those to say, well, we thought we were off target and basically what we're going to try and do for the next year to get us back on to target going forward. So firstly, with regard to completion of home fire safety checks or visits, and that's covered in paragraph 5.3 of the paper. So we very much recognise the need for us to improve upon this. So we need to increase the volume of visits that we're undertaking. In the last financial year, we had a target to complete 7,000, and we finished short of that. We finished the year, and I put the percentages on the right-hand columns. So we had 81% of the target completed, which was 5,674. So we recognise that we need to be meeting target. What we have done for the current year is to try and set the same target of achieving 7,000, but we need to make sure that we achieve it by the end of this current year. What we're doing for that is continuing to publicise the availability of the service to the public, and also making sure that the referrals we get from partner agencies and stakeholders, that we're maximising the returns from those. So we have good links with a number of agencies who refer people to us for home fire safety visits, and we need to make sure that we maximise the returns from those, so we have sufficient numbers for our crews to go out and deliver. The thing I did want to report as well as that, though, is, and it says about this in the paragraph, is though we miss our volume target, there is another thing that we can benchmark against, which is what the government do is they collect information about this from every fire and rescue service about the volume of home fire safety visits completed, but also those which have been completed to the most vulnerable groups, which roughly means people with disabilities or the elderly. And I'm pleased to report that when you look at it in that way, 97.2% of the visits undertaken by Avon Fire and Rescue Service were to people with those vulnerabilities, and that far exceeds the national average, which is 80.5. So just wanted to emphasise that though we did fewer than our target, the ones that we did do were better than the national average, with targeting people most vulnerable in the community. So there's a plus there as well. With regard to our staff sickness, that's detailed in paragraph 5.7 on the next page. We measure sickness using days or shifts lost against our full-time equivalent, and that's quite a standard way of doing it across fire and rescue services, and it does mean that we can benchmark the outcome performance against other fire and rescue services, which is a good thing to be able to do. And our target that we set is based upon the average performance of English fire and rescue services, but the problem with that is we can only do it in arrears. So the target for last financial year was based upon the average outcome for fire and rescue services of the previous year. So we did miss our target, and we ended up with 9.53 days or shifts lost per full-time equivalent against a target of 8.11. But so the thing I would highlight about that as well is when we look at our benchmarking information, our performance was strong compared to other fire and rescue services. So we were better than the average, and the figures on the right-hand column of the scorecard will show you that information to show that the average, and actually what I've gone on there is the data at the end of Q3, because the full year data wasn't available when this was produced, but we now do have it. So we were better than average for other fire and rescue services, and we finished 12th best. So the 12 fewest days or shifts lost to sickness. So though we missed our target, benchmarking wise, we did perform quite strongly. And what we will do is we'll use the average from last financial year as our target for this current financial year, which is our existing methodology and which we wish to stick to. The other thing I just wanted to say is in paragraph, just check for you, 5.1, we talk about our annual performance report that we produce that gives further commentary upon all of the corporate metrics and also uses some infographics to help make them more explainable and easy to understand to people. So in the paper I put that we are expecting that to be published and the location of where we publish it on our website, but I'm sorry to say it isn't quite over the line. We're just going through the final drafting of it, but we anticipate in the next week to 2 weeks that it will be published. And what I suggest we do, if that's okay, is we'll circulate the notification by email of when it is published and again the location of where it is. So it's something that we're quite proud of producing. It's no longer a statutory requirement for us to produce, but we do think it's important that we explain to the public and give them information about how we've performed against the targets that we have set. Okay, I didn't have anything else that I wished to highlight within the report, so if I could pause and then just open up for questions before we take the recommendation.
Thank you, Simon. Can I just, if we're doing that report, how do we publicise that report being available?
Yes, it's a good point. We certainly put it on to our website, make availability. I must admit, I'm not 100% sure how we publicly publicise that, but again, we could find out that, and when we circulate the email that it's available, we can give you some information about that, because it's possibly something we need to do a little bit more of.
I've made a note that we can raise that with corporate comms to support you with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just follow up with a question about the home fire safety visits then? So I notice on the family group benchmarking, it says rate per 1,000 population. Is that for the home fire safety visits? That corresponds with the line left of it?
Yes, it does, yes.
So that would have us actually having under half the rate of our benchmarking authorities. So we're doing far less home fire safety visits than our family group. Would that be roughly right?
Yes, it is roughly right. Yeah, compared to others, we are doing fewer per 1,000 population that it calculates.
So although we only just missed our target is substantially below that of our family group.
Yes, that's correct. It is something we recognise we need to increase the volume, but we're conscious of what we're trying to do is not to start doing, if you like, visits just for the sake of doing visits. We want to make them sure that they're targeted to those who are most vulnerable. So the key to this, I think, is to get more referrals from agencies so we're sure we're targeting the right people. But we recognise we do need to increase the volume.
Okay, thanks. And then just to follow that up, it looks like 38% of fires attended, people didn't have smoke alarms, which desperately reminds me I must replace the battery in my smoke alarm I took down yesterday. But that would be, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 150,000 properties then, if that is proportionate to properties. Do we have a plan, as in, when we go to homes for home fire safety visits, is a priority to try to get to those homes that don't have smoke alarms? I presume the majority of people who ask for one don't currently have smoke alarms, but do we monitor that?
Yeah, so we don't have a list, unfortunately, of properties that don't have smoke alarms, but when we do the home fire safety visits, we certainly fit alarms if it is appropriate. So if there aren't sufficient alarms or in the wrong place or the wrong type of alarms, then we make sure we do fit them. So I think it would be difficult to expand otherwise to say, okay, if the number of fires we attend, the percentages that don't have an alarm, and then calculate that for the full population, because there's all sorts of considerations with that. So it could be the places we're going to have fires are people who are less likely to have a working smoke alarm. There's all sorts of unknowns with regard to that. But I think the key to it is that, yes, we recognise we need to increase the volume of visits we're doing. We're pleased that the ones that we are doing are to people who are the most vulnerable, and we certainly do fit smoke alarms if it's appropriate to do so.
Thanks. And then I guess just the final question then, if we're planning to increase the volume, Have you set those exact plans now in place, or are those still being developed?
Yes, there are plans. When we did the target setting for this current financial year, as I say, we have reset the same target of achieving 7,000, but the metric owner, the head of the vulnerable adults team, was quite clear about the things that we're going to do to make sure we achieve that target. And that's where we hold people to account via our senior leadership team, and also reporting back to this committee about our progress on that.
Tim, I'd like to bring Luke in at this point.
Yeah, just a bit further assurance for you, Councillor. The target is 7,000 this year, but I've also set a local performance indicator for the local teams to increase that by 5%. So we're also looking at, one, how we get our partner referrals across the whole of the community. We've got a new person in place to generate those referrals, which is working really well. I still maintain that I want the most vulnerable people to be dealt with as a priority, because they are the ones that data tells us they're more likely to have a fire. But we're also working on how we can get our operational crews to generate and do more visits as well. The problem with that being, if they're at a local community event, as an example, people come along and give their data in, and it goes into a risk stratification process with their data, and then this is an NFCC-wide product we use. It gives them a risk score, so it may not always turn into a visit. So we can talk and promote it as much as we like, but the risk stratification process actually gives us that score on whether they need a visit and they're a priority.
Thanks. So just to follow that, do we think then perhaps other fire authorities aren't doing that? So they're going for the volume rather than the targeting. Is that your impression?
Yeah, I think, some services go for pure volume. I want quality, not necessarily quantity, and I want to target the most vulnerable people, because data tells us those people are the most at risk.
For now, yes.
Onkar and then David.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon, for the report. Just a very quick questions on this one. So on the home fire safety visit, so while we are below the actual target, but like nationally comparing to the other authorities, where we stand, like if we compare?
Yes, so sort of like Councillor Kent referred to, on the right-hand side it shows the benchmarking. Because different fire and rescue services will have different population levels, we divide it by 1,000 of population. So you can see there that, and this was after Q3 of that current financial year, to April to December, was what I had at the time of producing this. And yes, the rate for the average rate was 8.29, and we were at 3.61. So we weren't benchmarking with straight volumes very favourably.
Mr. Onkar. Thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. I'd like to have a quick discussion about the days lost to sickness. I've noticed in the corporate risk report there is a risk HR06, which is on page 102 of the big report, which talks about human resources absence management, and I'm just wondering if the figures we've been given about sickness are actually being modified as the year progresses, when this risk is actually being managed, because it talks about, as part of the ongoing transformation programme, work planning for supporting attendance, considering both the return to operational duties policy and working arrangements policy. We will review the processes associated with individuals on modified duties, which will include. I'm just wondering if that's a cause of the increased days of sickness, please.
Yeah, certainly the modified duties is a slightly different thing. So it's people who've returned sometimes after a period of sickness and are back with us but are unable to complete their full duties. So we place them on what we describe as modified duties, because they can do some work but not necessarily the whole thing. So those people are not included within the sickness data, but we do carefully monitor that as well. In some of our internal indicators, we monitor not only the number of people on modified duties, but also the period of time that are on modified duties. And I know Ali's team monitor that quite regularly and work with officers to try and get them back to full duties as soon as we can.
Thank you.
just looking, nobody else wants to. Can I just ask one question about the most vulnerable? And it's really, really great that we're focusing on that as a fire authority. Can I just ask in terms of the local authorities and when they're planning new houses, do we actually get consulted upon what they're putting in those houses in terms of those fire alarms and things like that?
Yeah, I think I can answer that one. It's part of a national standard with building regulations that every new home has to have working smoke alarms. So it's done automatically.
That's good. Thank you. As always, a very full report and much appreciated. Thank you. So I'm now moving on then to... do we need to have a vote on that? I think...
I don't think we do. I think the reason it was put in the script as approval is it was an annual report rather than an update. I think that's why. But actually, I don't think you need to vote on this. You're noting it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Over to you then, Verity. And it's a verbal report this time.
Yes, I will give you an update because I wrote, at the time of writing this report, the accounts hadn't been published and I can give an update on where we are now. So my paper is paper 9, starting on page 29 of your packs. And this paper is to give you an update on where we are with the 24-25 draft statement of accounts. So this is for the year ended March 2025. The recommendation in this paper is to note the planned publication of the draft unaudited statement of accounts prior to the 30th of June 2025 deadline for public inspection. So the background section of this paper at the bottom of page 29 really just outlines the timings that we have to stick to in terms of statutory requirements for publishing our accounts. And at the bottom of the page in paragraph 3.2, it just highlights there that there's been an extension to the date that the draft unaudited accounts have to be published and available for public inspection. So there's been an extension of a month. So in the past, we've had to publish by the end of May and have the first 10 working days of June within that public inspection period, but now that's been delayed, so the first 10 working days of July have to be included, so we had to publish these accounts by the end of June. And that extension has been applied for a number of years. This is the first of a few years, and that's to help with the audit backlog that's been seen over the last few years. If I move on to page 30, and in particular paragraph 5.1 in the key consideration section of the paper, so this paragraph confirms that at the time of writing this report, the time that this report was published, we hadn't published the draft unaudited statement of accounts. I can confirm that they were published on Monday, so they were published on the 16th of June. And the reason that we published them, we couldn't quite publish them at the time of writing this paper, even though we hoped we would be able to, is because we received pension information, so the IAS 19 reports, which are the reports that give us the information for both pension schemes from the scheme actuaries. And we actually had a surplus on our local government pension scheme, which is something we haven't experienced before, but it is not uncommon in the public sector this financial year. So I know that Bristol City Council have had a similar situation. They've had a surplus on their scheme as well as other services in the fire sector. So because of that surplus, there are specific rules around recognising that asset, the net asset of the scheme, and you have to, we needed an additional report from the scheme actuary to be able to just assess whether we should really be recognising an asset on that scheme. So we requested that report, and it was received on the 10th of June. We then updated the draft accounts with that information, which allowed us to publish the accounts for public inspection on Monday of this week. So that additional report from the actuaries actually brought the scheme back into deficit, which is where schemes are or have been for a long time. And it's just to do with the fact that we have to apply a ceiling, which is about making sure that if we recognise an asset in the same way that we recognise any asset in the accounts, it's actually, we can realise the benefit of that asset. And actually, when you apply an asset ceiling, you can't, it brought that asset level down. So that has been reflected in the draft account. So the following paragraphs in section 5 of this paper just confirm where those accounts have been published. So in paragraph 5.3, you can see there's a link there. That's where the accounts have been published as of Monday. And then paragraph 5.5 at the top of page 31 just confirms the public rights statement, which has also been published. That's available as a news story on our website. And the accounts have to be open for public inspection for a period of 30 working days. So the period of public inspection will end on the 28th of July this year, at which point the audit will start. So the audit is complete. The external audit will start towards the end of July into August. And the final thing I just wanted to mention, the risk section. So the first risk talks about kind of audit backlog and the delayed receipt of pension information in the past that's caused delays in us publishing our accounts. But obviously, as you can see, we've published our accounts in time with the deadline this year. So the risk around publishing draft accounts has kind of been mitigated. But the second risk in paragraph 6.2 is around making sure that we publish our final audited accounts by the backstop date of the 27th of February 2027. I mean, at this point in time, there are no concerns around this deadline. The audit will take place during July and August. Bishop Fleming have pulled together and presented their external audit plan at the previous meeting of this committee in March earlier this year. And should be reporting back to this committee in September on the progress of their report, and they're aiming to have the accounts signed off by the end of December of this year, which should give us a little bit of contingency if needed to ensure that we do meet that 27th of February deadline. And there was nothing else I wanted to raise unless there's any questions.
Thank you for your information update. My question is this backlog taking the audit group, is that the technical issues or they are not capable to do that, the timescales to meet the targets?
In the past, it's been around, there's just been a backlog. There were lots of issues with pension information being received late, and there were additional pension rulings that happened that meant that the pension scheme valuations couldn't take place. So lots of public sector bodies couldn't then finalise their accounts. So it then put lots of pressure on the audit sector to be able to sign off those accounts in line with the deadline. So then a backlog built up. The government have put kind of additional dates or kind of extended deadlines and things to try and help relieve that backlog. We're now in a really fortunate position where we have no backlog left. We cleared 3 sets of accounts last year, so that we are now just looking at the financial year 24-25 in terms of audit to sign off this year. So we're in a really fortunate position where we managed to clear our backlog now, so it's not a risk that we are currently facing.
Verity, can I just ask a question about those accounts? Does this committee actually see the accounts and comment upon them in terms of assurance?
So I haven't published them here in terms of, because they are about 100 pages long, so we have previously included them as a paper in the agenda, but it's just a lot of reading. So they're available on the link and everybody can access them. They will be brought back to the committee following audit as well. So the audit will take place and we'll bring back a final audited version for the committee to scrutinise before they get finally signed off.
Thank you. Right, so we move on. I think once again this is for approval, but it is to approve the note in the account.
I'm just going to note that the accounts have been published. I don't really need to vote on that.
Okay.
So thank you very much. As always, a really good report.
So moving on then, let's have a look then at the, I think we're moving into the annual governance and assurance statement, a really full document for us to be looking at. And that's going to be Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So I'd like to present the annual governance and assurance statement for 2024-25, which starts at page 33. This is a decision paper where members of the committee are asked to approve the draft annual governance and assurance statement. So each year we're required to prepare an annual governance statement under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. The governance statement aims to provide assurance to the AFA that services are being delivered in accordance with the prevailing legislation, regulations and government guidance, and provides a clear assessment of how the governance framework has operated over the previous financial year. In accordance with the Fire and Rescue National Framework for England, every fire authority must also publish a statement of assurance each year. The statement provides assurance to the community and to the government by explaining how the AFA has complied with this framework. So the most efficient way to meet the requirements of both the national framework and the audit regulations is through a creation of this combined report, which we've entitled Annual Governance and Assurance Statement. This is a new approach this year, which aims to reduce duplication across the 2 statements, which have historically been published separately. Excuse me. So the statement itself can be found from page 39 of your packs. You'll notice that the document has a short executive summary up front and the SIP for Solace principles used to structure key areas of governance. There's also sections setting out financial and operational arrangements, an overview of our external sources of assurance such as HMICFRS, internal and external audit, and there's current challenges and future improvements also included. The annual review of effectiveness of the AFA's governance framework was carried out in April this year. This comprises of reviews and self-assessments taken into consideration the SIP for Solace principles, the internal governance and assurance fire standard, the requirements of the Fire and Rescue National Framework, risks captured within the risk register, and HMIC FRS findings, internal and external audit reports. You'll note there's an exec summary on page 41, which has concluded at paragraph 1.3 that the service has had due regard for the requirements of the Fire and Rescue National Framework. Also stating at 1.7 that our self-assessment has not identified any weaknesses in our governance arrangements, in addition to those identified already in the HMIC FRS report, which are already being addressed. On the basis of the annual review of effectiveness, we consider that governance arrangements are adequate and effective. It's hard to summarise such a lengthy report, but I'd like to draw your attention to a few of the key improvements and some of the commentary to demonstrate the breadth of the information captured. Culture change has remained a priority in 24-25. Section 5 on pages 46 and 47 provide assurance on the arrangements we have in place to support culture change in the service. Amongst many initiatives, we have seen improvements to our values and behaviour-based discipline processes, with associated policies being reviewed and published alongside manager toolkits, and the establishment of a professional standards board to manage discipline cases. At paragraph 5.16 on page 48, we can see that last year saw the completion of the remaining recommendations from the independent governance review, with changes made to the constitution and improvements around member training and development. Paragraph 6.7 on page 49. Continuing to encourage staff engagement and feedback, the service launched its Women and Allies Network, with more staff networks being embedded in the coming year. Paragraph 10.6 and 10.7 on page 54 summarise developments in the service's approach to corporate risk. Section 12 provides assurance around operational aspects of the service. A key focus this year is seen on page 57, continue to improve the quality of site-specific risk information available to our operational crews. The service's financial arrangements and assurance mechanisms are set out in section 13, which is from page 63. And if I can take you to page 67, section 15 provides the head of internal audit's opinion. You'll see that they've given the opinion that the service has an adequate and effective framework for risk management, governance and internal control, with further enhancements identified to ensure it remains adequate and effective. Paragraphs 15.5 and 15.6, so that's page 68, are highlighted as they will need to be updated with the external auditor's opinion on the financial statements on how we provide value for money when their work for the 24-25 financial year has been completed. 15.7 onwards summarises the current position relating to our HMIC FRS findings and the assurance measures which have been strengthened throughout the year, such as 15.11 and 15.12, which describe the introduction of an internal improvement board. Section 16 from page 71 highlights ongoing challenges around finances and culture and sets out some of the more significant planned improvements for 25-26. These include increased insurance mechanisms relating to pension contributions, increased monitoring and oversight of projects and programmes, developing a longer-term people services strategy, increasing staff consultation and engagement with the launch of more dedicated staff networks. These are important to support staff with associated protected characteristics and improve psychological safety. Networks also encourage allyship through better understanding of lived experience, which can be applied in the development of inclusive policies and processes. We'll continue to develop digital dashboards to enable managers and staff to visualise data and inform decision making. In particular, the People Dashboard will allow for more informed decisions to be made regarding health and well-being of our staff. Page 72, you'll see under section 17 that the statement will need to be signed by the Chair of the Authority, the Chief Fire Officer and the Statutory Finance Officer and the Clerk. And finally, moving to page 75, the appendix shows the summary of the findings of the self-assessment against the SIP for Solace principles of good governance. There is a detailed breakdown under each of the 7 principles showing evidence to support where we are adhering to the principles, actions we implemented in the last financial year to further strengthen our governance arrangements, and details of the improvements planned for the current year. The independent member asked about the governance arrangements for the action plan in the appendix. The expectation is that the actions are already built into the controlled environment, for example, documented in a member of staff's PDR as an objective to complete, or a local team plan which a manager oversees, or they're already in the HMICFRS action plan, service plan, or improvement plan captured in the improvement register. Reassurance that this is the case will be sought from the relevant managers, and in addition, the action plan will be reviewed as part of next year's review of effectiveness. The independent member also asked a question about cultural improvement. If I can hand over to CFO Gazard for that one.
Thank you, Helen. I've got a written response to the question here, and the response is from Assistant Chief Fire Officer Paula Lyons. The question is, how is the service ensuring continuous cultural improvement, especially following national scrutiny of fire and rescue services? So we are committed to ensuring both a good culture and continuous improvement. Following our last inspection, we have undertaken a significant amount of activity, but also ensured we have a long-term plan to continue driving this important work. This year, we have established an improvement directorate called Portfolio, which is responsible for a number of programmes, including culture and continuous improvement. We have strategies and action plans which are both responsive to recommendations and forward-looking as we seek best practice and aiming for excellence. We now have a professional standards board and have developed the people services function to make sure we have the capacity and resource for the future. We also regularly work with external partners who act as both critical friends and scrutinise our work, and through regular engagement and analysis, monitor many areas within the service to assure ourselves and communities we are continually improving.
Thank you. And the independent member also asked some questions about financial planning and assurance regarding pension deductions, so I'll hand over to Verity for those.
Thank you. So the first question was around aligning financial planning with service delivery in light of the reported budget deficit. So I think this is asking a question around whether we can really still deliver our services when we know that we've got a deficit, a gap to bridge in terms of budget balancing. So SLB and the rest of the service are working on aligning our financial plan to our service delivery model at the moment. So a paper is coming to the Fire Authority meeting at the end of June, which kind of provides a walk of how that 25-26 budget is going to be balanced, because the last information that we presented to the full Fire Authority was a budget that had around 1.3 million of gap that we still needed to bridge. So there is a paper coming to the Fire Authority in a week or so's time, which will explain how we are bridging that gap, but it will also highlight that some of the ways that we're bridging the gap in the current financial year are not necessarily recurring. So we do need to look at how we are going to balance that budget on an ongoing basis and make sure that we bridge the gap across the medium-term financial plan. So there's work ongoing within the efficiencies and savings team, fed up through SLT and SLB, to make sure that we're considering all the options that are available to us in terms of balancing the budget and making sure that each of those options are impact assessed and modelled against our current response and its attendance standards to ensure that we are aligning our financial aspirations, so balancing the budget, with any potential consequences that might have on service delivery to make sure that those aren't compromised. And there was a further question for me on pension. So Helen mentioned additional pension kind of controls and assurance mechanisms we have in place. So the question was around specifically what those mechanisms are. So I'm not sure if members would, because it would have gone to Policy and Resources Committee, but we have well, no, it's mentioned here in terms of risk registers and stuff. We've moved across to a new payroll provider from the 1st of July. So from the 1st of July this year, we will be working with a new payroll provider for our payroll and pension contribution administration. So we are putting in place monthly spot checks from the 1st of July. So we will make sure that in finance, we will pick a sample. So the payroll team within finance will pick a sample every month of employees that are contributing to both pension schemes. The sample will cover making sure we're checking employee and employer contributions across both pension schemes and across a range of bandings within those pension schemes and a range of different scenarios, so both on-call and whole-time firefighters, for example, people that have got potentially an acting up allowance or any additional allowances that might impact and making sure that the pension has been applied effectively. So those samples will be sent over to the pensions team within People Services, who will perform the recalculation checks to make sure that those calculations and contributions are administered correctly prior to the payroll being run each month. So that will be an internal control and kind of check that we're introducing going forward to make sure from the start of our new payroll provider pension contributions are administered correctly. A significant amount of work has gone into building that new payroll system with the new provider to make sure that the system is built in line with both pension scheme rules. So, and lots of testing has been in place over the last couple of months to check that. So we're quite confident that the build of the new system is accurate, and we will just continually check that because pension scheme contribution rates and things like that will change in future. And the second part of the question was how these assurance measures will be reported and audited. So those assurance measures that I've just discussed are internal, really, so it will be internally reported and monitored within both finance and people services. But in addition to that, we're looking at getting a bit more independent assurance over our pension contribution calculations. And so we will be looking at engaging with RSM once we've let the new payroll provider embed, so give them a few months to kind of embed and get to kind of business as usual. We will then be looking at having an internal audit specifically focused on pension contributions to make sure that we have built that system accurately and that our contributions are accurate going forwards.
Thank you. That concludes my presentation, unless members have any other questions.
Can I just ask, I've got a copy of the questions asked by the independent member and the replies. They're very full and very effective. Have they been circulated out to the whole committee? Because I think it would be worthwhile people seeing them.
The replies were just finished, I think, yesterday, right. so that's why they haven't gone to everyone. But I can certainly commit to circulate that to all members of this committee. That's not a problem.
Any questions, anybody?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Helen, for your report. I would like to express my appreciation for the enhancements made to the annual governance statement for 24-25. Notably, the document has increased in length by 50% since its previous version, offering considerably more detail to members, employees and the public regarding the measures that Avon Fire and Rescue Service is implementing to improve its governance in response to the recent reports from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services. But I do have some questions. The spreadsheet that's attached to this report, can it either be reissued or numbered in a way that we can actually reference the specific actions? So can each action have a unique reference number so that when this report is presented to us, we can actually track what's going on much easier? Because I'm about to question or provide some more detail about one of the items on page 78. The one second from the bottom about, certainly, page 78, yeah. Yeah. The second from the bottom, it's about new legislation and how we're monitoring it. So I am involved with a devolution working group in terms of the Southwest, and we are monitoring the ways that this devolution white paper, was it a white or green paper, I can't remember, about how it's actually going to be implemented. And there is a section 3.9 in that document where it talks about the police and fire and rescue services. We aim to provide efficient, accountable and visible leadership with a determination from the outset to bring together the roles which operate at a sub-regional level. Where mayoral geographies align with police and fire and rescue geographies, mayors will be by default responsible for exercising the Police and Crime Commissioner and Fire and Rescue Authority functions. The government is committed to increasing the number of mayors who take on the Police and Crime Commissioner and Fire and Rescue Authority responsibilities, and alignment with police and fire and services boundaries will therefore be a key consideration in the negotiation of new strategic authorities. So North Somerset is planning to join WECA, which means that the geographical boundaries do align. And as one of my other hats is chair of the West of England Combined Authorities Audit Committee, I will be taking a close eye on this, because I want to make sure that any transition however it is implemented, goes as smoothly as possible for both the Combined Authority and the Fire Authority.
Can I just say thank you for raising that? It's really helpful. Obviously, it's going to be after my time, but if you can work with the clerk to impart any information you glean, that would be really helpful for us. Thank you.
I certainly will.
Tim?
So this is a question for Councillor Wilcox. As there's probably a greater than a 50% chance that Gloucestershire will also join WECA, what impact does that have regarding the alignment of boundaries?
That's a very good question, Councillor Kent. How the Gloucestershire Fire Service aligns up, because does that align to the county boundaries?
Gloucestershire is a county council fire and rescue service,
right,
aligned to the local council.
So the fire rescue service for the West of England Combined Authority might well grow substantially. I didn't qualify my remarks, you might note.
I think I'd just like to pass comment that we are very alive to these conversations that are happening as a fire and rescue service. We currently work within coterminous boundaries here in Avon and Somerset Constabulary. At some point we will be involved in those conversations once plans are progressed, but we are very much alive to it and keeping an eye on the ground to see what's happening.
Can I just ask a question of everybody then? It's a timing question, because the talk about North Somerset joining WECA, there's been lots of conversations about whether they go into Somerset rather than coming into WECA. I mean, is it actually given that they are going to be joining WECA, and what sort of timescales are we talking about?
I don't think
in terms of the relevance to the fire authority.
I don't think anything's a given at the moment. North Somerset have expressed a preference to join the West of England Combined Authority. Can a North Somerset councillor confirm that? Is there a North Somerset here? No. So I think they want to join WECA, but what the timescales are, I don't know, and whether there would need to be new West of England Combined Authority elections for the mayor as a result of that, I don't know.
And funding issues.
It would be really complicated, but in terms of we're here today around the fire authority and what the implications of the fire authority would be. Can I just say that this is a really, really full report, and I read it with confidence, really, because I think it does expose where we've got to do work, but it does, in actual fact, say we're dealing with things. I just got one query. Through the policy committee, there was a challenge to councillors that we'd had lots of plans, but we hadn't actually followed those plans through to make sure they were delivered. And I think the question I've got is does this actually pick up the delivery, the outcomes of all the plans that we've got in terms of assurance that we're actually giving through this report, which I think, as I say, is really stunningly good.
Yes, that sort of links a bit to the independent members' question and slightly to your and Councillor Wilcox about the numbering of the action plan. So because this action plan is really pulling together a lot of work that's going on elsewhere in the service already, we don't really want to create a new action plan to monitor it in its format within this document. So our role within corporate assurance will be to make sure that everything that's in the action plan is being sort of followed through via another means, like via either team plans, the service plan, the improvement plan, HMI CFRS plan. But I can certainly check on that and circulate something to members afterwards to make sure we've got that assurance.
Thank you. And Luke, do you want to?
Yeah, I would just like to say, similar to Helen, really, I think through the corporate assurance team, they are very, very good at monitoring progress regularly. And I can absolutely assure the authority that we are delivering against all those actions. We've prioritised, we've created smart objectives. We can't achieve everything at once. We understand that there's a huge volume to do. But through being smart in how we work and building programmes and portfolios to join a lot of actions together, we think that's the best delivery model. And then Helen and the team assure us regularly on how we're delivering and updates to how we're performing.
So we have the evidence trail to give to HMI next time they come in?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got something called an internal improvement register where all our actions are collated at this moment in time. There are a lot of actions, but like I said, we're collating them into programs and portfolios, but all the evidence is kept within one digital portal.
Thank you. So we've got a complication with this one, haven't we? Because there's a couple of areas where you said it's subject to, do we want to have a vote on this? Because I think we do need to have a vote. So can I just make sure nobody else has got any further questions?
I've got a lot of questions. Sorry? Yeah, I've got a question to ask. Oh, sorry, yes, carry on.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick one on the service planning, because here we mention the increased stakeholder engagement throughout rather than just a standard consultation period. So how that going to be different? How that would be different?
I think so at the moment we tend to do an annual public engagement sort of process where we'll go out each year before we review, as we review and refreshing our plan, as a public consultation at the same time as we do the budgetary consultation. So the plan for the coming years to do more sort of smaller engagements on pieces within the service plan, perhaps in a public way, whether it be on social media or what have you. I believe one of my colleagues is doing some work with corporate comms at the moment to look at what that plan looks like going forward, so we can certainly circulate a bit more of an outline of that to you after the meeting. And then internally with staff engagement, I think the plan is to do a lot more staff engagement throughout the year, making sure that they're fully aware of what's in the plan, allowing them to feedback on what's in there and help to shape the plan and create further buy-in from our staff to drive the plan forward. But I'll certainly get my colleague to sort of come up with an outline perhaps that I can forward after the meeting.
Anybody else want before we move into the recommendations?
So the
recommendation then is this committee is asked to approve the content subject to paragraphs 15.5, 15.6 being updated with the head of external audit opinion and commentary on value for money when published. So shall we work on the basis then of our normal, is anybody voting against this? Anybody propose? I'll propose it. Anybody second it? Thank you, David. Thank you. So anybody against? Anybody want to defer? Or therefore the assumption is it's approved. So
Those in favour?
oh well. I've taken that for granted. Sorry.
That's fine.
Amanda.
Just checking.
Yeah. So can I thank you? It's a really, really full report, and it makes me feel proud of Avon Fire Authority for actually putting everything on the table in that way. And it's a great credit to you. Thank you, and everybody in the organisation, because you're just the bit we see. So thank you very much. So we now come on to Sam and Matt in terms of the RSM report. Can we just pick up the fact that there is an exempt appendix? If anybody's got any queries, we may have to go into exempt process to do that. But the main report is there for you, and it's just whether there's any other queries around that a bit later. Helen, sorry.
Sorry, I've got the sort of internal part of the report before we go on to
Oh, is that?
RSM,
Sorry,
if that's
have I
okay?
missed something?
That's all right. Helen Starr. Helen can introduce the internal update on internal audit before handing over to the auditors themselves.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Over to you again, Helen.
Thank you. So this report starts at page 97 of your packs. The report has 3 recommendations, which are to scrutinise the progress made against the internal audit recommendations and management actions, and then to scrutinise and note the internal auditor's progress report and note the internal auditor's sector briefing and quality assurance and improvement programme. If I can ask members to turn to page 98 and the top of 99, you'll see that there is 2 tables providing a summary of the progress for the internal audit actions for each year, where there are remaining actions. For the year 23-24, Of the 27 agreed actions, 21 have now been closed. Of the 6 remaining, 5 have required an extension and 1 HR absence management action has been reported as closed but not yet had the evidence verified. For the 24-25 audit year, of the 24 actions, 14 are now closed, with the remaining 10 requiring extensions. The internal auditors provided confirmation of the closed management actions within their quarterly progress report. And the appendices, so page 101 for Appendix 1, give you a summary of the progress for the remaining actions of 23-24. However, the IT cyber risk review actions are summarised within the exempt appendix, which follows at agenda item 18. On page 103, Appendix 2 is a summary of progress against the actions for 24-25. That's my update on how we're progressing with implementing the actions. Positive progress being made. Before I hand over to RSM, is there any questions on those appendices?
Tim?
I had a quick question, but it may delve into the exempt stuff, so apologies, I don't actually have access to the exempt stuff. Our Appendix 2, BC06, Business Continuity, it says it's planned to finish that by end of June 2025. There's about 10 days left in June. Are we still on target to finish that, because it's slipped a few times?
I don't have an update on the IT business continuity one specifically. When the papers are produced, they're somewhat a few weeks beforehand, so we can only sort of report the position at that stage. I have had an update regarding the other business continuity actions, because there was five other ones also with June, that they've all been completed pending the evidence being checked by RSM, but I haven't been able to get an update verbally for you on the IT one, I'm afraid.
Is that something that maybe could be sent to the committee later when you've got an update, just to confirm if it has been completed or not? Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Can I just make sure you've noted that, Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to build on the comments from Councillor Kent, because I know that 12 of the actions out of the 13% have had their timescales for implementation extended. I'm concerned that the adequate resources are being allocated to resolve these audit findings. Admittedly, 6 of them are till June 2025, this month. Can a steer be given about whether these actions will be completed and do not require a further extension? Also, a lot of the extensions happened because the business continuity steering group didn't meet. What was the rationale for it not meeting, and will it be meeting this month to actually clear this stuff, please?
So the business continuity steering group meeting has now taken place. I think that was on Monday, I think. So the first 5 of those business continuity actions have all now been closed, pending the evidence being checked by RSM. I'm not aware of the reason, I'm afraid, about why the meeting didn't take place. I don't know if Luke's any the wiser. No. Can certainly follow up on that if you'd like us to.
It's good to know that a lot of the actions are now being cleared, but obviously that doesn't help in our reports. So we'll have to look forward to the next meeting of audit to actually clarify all this stuff. Thank you.
I think the update we've already committed to provide will hopefully give you that assurance.
Can I also just ask a question around transition? Because later on in the agenda we're talking about recommissioning internal audit. And have we got plans for the transition in case, I mean, I have no idea whether the current people are going to apply or not, but have we got a transition plan in place so that we can actually make sure that the new auditors, whoever they are, actually work effectively, if you like, from day one?
Yeah, I was going to cover that one in the paper regarding the contract. I can cover it now if you prefer. So I've got a response prepared because it's similar to the independent members' question. So an implementation plan detailing timescales, actions, resources, procedures and responsibilities to ensure a smooth transition of services from one provider to another will be requested as part of the tender process. So the successful bidder will be required to make themselves available prior to April to ensure a smooth transition and to develop the new internal audit plan to ensure it is in place as soon as practically possible after April 26th.
Thank you. Not very well. So, do we at this stage hand over to the RSM?
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose just first of all, a quick introduction, as it's my first audit committee, so my first time meeting a lot of you. So I'm Matt Stacey. Any of you who are familiar with Victoria, of course, she's moved on to Pastures New. So I'm stepping into that role. I appreciate it's very big shoes to fill. She was very much beloved by the service, so I'm conscious of that. We have got continuity in terms of Mark Jones remaining as your head of internal audit, and Sam Hawkins, who continues in her role coordinating all of the activity. So the update we've got for you today is quite light touch, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. The key messages really are that 24-25 is now completely concluded. We presented the annual report at the last meeting, and that's now all been finalised. So that's all very positive messaging, and we can focus now on 25-26. So within that, and you'll note, if I just check, so on page 116 of the pack, page 6 of our update, you've got the progress against our plan. So the stores and stock management has been underway. As you'll appreciate in terms of the timelines, it's mentioned June 2025 as a target committee. Given the paper deadlines, that was very ambitious, so we will be looking to present that now at September. But in terms of the audit, we've had very positive engagement from the teams involved, so it is moving along at pace. We've also got prevention, which we've completed a scoping meeting and got the terms of reference agreed, so that equally is ready to start in the next couple of months. So that's the start of the audit plan. I'll just briefly hand over to Sam to talk through the action tracking we've got within this.
Thank you. So, yeah, not too much to say on this, but as previously mentioned, we've included our action tracking within Appendix C of our progress report, which is presented at each committee. So within this, you can see that we have verified 4 internal actions have been marked as closed. We did note that at the time of our action tracking that 7 had been marked on the services track as being completed. However, we weren't able to verify those at the time of our review, but did note that considerable progress had been made regarding the other 3. So hopefully in terms of the next round of action tracking, we'll be able to provide assurance that those ones have been closed off. That's all I wanted to say on that one.
And then just to conclude our update, so we've included an emergency services news briefing in the pack. You've got the February 2025 one here. It's just aggregating key information from across the sector and includes a few questions that you may wish to consider as a committee around some of those updates to give yourself assurance. So I believe it's pages 8 and 9 of this report, so 128 and 129 of this pack. We've also provided the May 2025 briefing to officers so that they can work through and see if there are any key information in that would need to be providing assurance on. So that's everything for our update. I'll open it up to the room in terms of questions.
Just start off, I mean, you've posed some deliberate questions to this committee. Are you expecting deliberate answers? I'm new as well, so I'm just asking what the process is. I'll probably look at Helen or Luke on that.
So I'll go first, and if anyone wants to add anything, Helen, welcome to. The intention of it really is just for you to, as a committee, consider whether you feel assured around those questions. Are they the sort of burning questions that you'd like the answers to? Some of them are obviously very topical, so it's not necessarily that we need to deliberately cover them as part of this meeting. It's just to make sure that you feel you're getting the assurance you need, that they aren't areas of risk that keep you up at night, essentially.
You're not going to say anything extra?
No, I've got nothing to add.
Right. So, any questions anybody wants to ask at this stage? Right.
It probably helps that the annual report was reported last time, wasn't it? So it's it feels slightly out of sync. So we had the final annual report from the internal auditors slightly before the end of the financial year. So at the last meeting which you missed, so you're at a disadvantage here, so that's what I'm trying to help. So that report was presented, but was with the caveat, in case anything changes, we can't. So that report is now final and finished, so that's why you don't have to approve it again today. But it's just bringing you up to date with the progress that's been made on previous recommendations, to note the progress that they're making with the in-year audit, so that's why we went through that appendix. And then also just to note the sector updates that you've been provided. So, I mean, we can run through the recommendations to see if anyone feels that they need to vote on them. I don't think you need to. But...
Chair, I have a quick question, because I feel bad that you guys have sat there and then no one's asked you a question. So, do you feel that we provide you with enough funding to fund enough time that you're able to adequately provide an internal audit service for us?
How do we answer this without sounding biased? I mean, what I would say, obviously, looking at last year's programme, we got positive engagement, we've concluded it in year, and that is very rare. I think you might be the only organisation that I work directly with where the annual report was completed in year. So that's just what I'll say to the point over there. To the question, I think probably looking at comparable sized fire services, the plan is a little lighter. But as Mark spoke to at the last meeting, there's enough work that we deliver that we're able to give an annual opinion, and we feel we have sufficient breadth and coverage of the different areas. So the answer is, of course, that more is always good. But equally, it's the question for the service is around the ability to accommodate a level of audit, and not just that, but be able to have the capacity to respond to the actions from it. So for us, it would be around how much capacity is there to be able to undertake more audit, and then equally what benefit does it bring. There is, of course, in-year conversations as well, so Verity touched on pensions an area that we're considering. So I think where there is more targeted assurance, things change. The intention of what we deliver is to be agile. So that's something that we're always considering, always looking back at. Even the audits in the plan for this year aren't fixed, so if things do change, we're able to look at that. Equally, you get other forms of external assurance. Obviously, you've got HMICFRS, that'll be this year. So there's the number of other ways of getting assurance. So ultimately, I think the question comes to you as a committee, do you feel comfortable you're getting enough assurance across the board as well? So there's a few different factors there. And then it'll look at like your risk register, for example. Do you feel you're getting enough assurance internally mixed with independent assurance? So that's a longer answer to not just say more is, you know, pay us more, basically.
I think you ought to be a politician. Thank you for that answer. But I think, Tim, later on the agenda, item 13, we've got about the internal audit contract. And that's probably a question we need to address, particularly at that stage as well. So perhaps we can pick that up a bit later, because I think it is relevant to our role as an audit and assurance committee.
Thanks, Chair. I think that paper does actually talk about the need to potentially certainly expand internal audit. Yeah.
Right, so should we just go through the scrutinise the progress made against internal audit recommendations and management actions? A. Thank you.
We don't need proposers on these, do we? I
just think read them out.
Yeah,
Do you want me to continue?
so scrutinise and note the internal auditor's progress report, note the internal auditor's briefing and quality assurance and improvement programme. So really just hopefully everybody's happy to just move forward on that particular item. Matt?
It was just to say, I've noticed we have got some slides around the quality assurance and improvement programme in the pack. I wasn't planning to go over them unless there's specific questions. It's more just to give you comfort around what we're doing within RSM to ensure we're giving the best service possible and that the auditors are being audited.
And a final point just to mention, Chair, just because, again, you might not be aware, we have a meeting lined up with both external and internal audit at the September meeting, which will be a meeting privately held between the auditors and the members with no officers allowed in the room before the meeting, which will give you that opportunity to have that frank and open discussion about audit.
Thank you. You've answered the question I was going to ask you after the meeting, because it is important that members have that independent advice from internal and external audit. So that's a really positive note, and I'm pleased to hear that.
Okay, so with no questions on the
exempt appendix. We'll move on then to item 12, which is the annual reporting of the terms of reference 8 to include whistleblowing, grievance and discipline. And Alison, that's over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'll just talk you through some of the highlights of the report, then happy to answer any questions. All of the figures for this report are taken from the last financial year of 24-25. Firstly, around whistleblowing, there were no whistleblowing reports received in that window. To address the question from the independent member that received this week, which was some assurance around the whistleblowing policy being well known and promoted within the service, given that no reports had been received in that time frame. A little bit of background, the policy itself was reviewed and agreed with the Fire Authority and implemented with supporting communications plan. Since then, it has been referenced in relevant toolkits and resource hubs, including the grievance, discipline and the dignity and respect toolkits and hubs. It's referenced in specific awareness videos that are currently being developed for those toolkits. Additional comms piece was launched in March this year, highlighting the various routes available for raising any concerns, and that included the whistleblowing policy. It's also included in line manager training content, plus the HR, EDI and wellbeing teams are well versed on that and can signpost and remind staff during their daily interactions, supportive conversations and when addressing various parts of the casework. And then just to finally add that obviously it is quite difficult to be fully assured that it's well known across the service unless and until we specifically ask a question around this. We currently undertake a touchpoint survey every 9 to 12 months across the service. We've just done one, just released one, so we will keep this specific area under review and consider that ahead of the next survey to see if it would be valuable to ask that question. Okay, moving on to anti-money laundering. Again, no reports of any concerns around money laundering received within that period. Anti-fraud and anti-corruption, again, no reports within that period. And just to highlight, a recent legislative change has introduced a new offence around failure to prevent fraud, which will come into effect on the 1st of September this year. And the Head of Procurement is working with the Statutory Finance Officer and Clerk to review the Constitution and service policies to see if any changes need to be made to those policies or procedures to take account of that new offence. Moving on to external complaints, there were 15 external complaints received in relation to members of staff within that time frame. That's an increase from 5 complaints received in the previous year.
Sorry, can I just ask, what do you mean by an external complaint?
Yep, that's no problem. So an external complaint is anything that's been raised to us via from a member of the public, anybody who doesn't already work for Avon Fire and Rescue Service. If it's an internal complaint, then we would deal with that through essentially informal and informal grievance procedures.
Is it broken down into front-end, delivery and internal issues, or is it just not recorded any difference?
No, we receive anything that comes to us usually comes through Simon's team, because there's a portal on the intranet that a member of the public can submit a complaint or concern, and everything goes to one area. And then Simon's team will forward that on to HR if the complaint references anything to do with a member of staff. So that might be their behaviour, perceived behaviour. It might be to do with attendance at an incident. It might be to do with a recruitment process, that they feel there's been an inconsistency or unfairness, or they have a concern they would like to raise about it. So anything that falls under that quite broad umbrella comes via the HR team to record, and then it's allocated to a local manager to look into the details around that and come back to us.
So do you then follow up that that's been dealt with effectively?
Yes, we do, yeah. We make sure they're all closed down, and we make sure Simon's team's kept in the loop so that we can adequately record when something begins and ends. And then if there's an outcome that we need to then take further action, it will go into one of the internal processes, specifically around either performance, capability or discipline if that's needed, if it's a conduct issue. Okay. No, that's fine. Moving on to employee grievance matters. Within that time frame, 5 formal grievances were raised. That remains steady with the previous year, where again 5 grievances were raised. There is a table at 5.8 in the paper which highlights at very high level what the issues were and the outcomes in relation to those. And then finally, in terms of employee discipline, within this period, there were 6 formal disciplinary cases, which is quite a drop from the previous year of 15. And again, the table in 5.9 gives you a very top level overview of what those issues may have been relating to and the outcomes of those. Additionally, I would just like to highlight a couple of additional points. So it's been mentioned already at this meeting, but the Professional Standards Board is now implemented and overseeing all discipline cases, providing oversight and scrutiny, and ensuring organisational learning is captured and embedded. There has been extensive training undertaken throughout 2024 for all line managers, focusing on tackling poor behaviours and how to undertake investigations and conduct effective hearings. The new discipline policy was launched in January this year, along with an extensive supporting toolkit for managers. And the new grievance policy was launched in February this year, with the supporting toolkit currently in development, ready to be published soon. So that's all of the updates, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. David?
Chair, I'd like to delve into the increased number of complaints that have happened from 5 to 15. What was the year before that number of complaints? I'm trying to see if there's any trends happening.
I don't have that information, I'm afraid.
Okay. So I noticed one of the ways you can actually submit a complaint is via the website. Was that process simplified?
My assumption would be that it is simpler. It's certainly new within this time frame, so we didn't have that previously. So that, yeah, I think Simon did work with the comms team to redesign what that looks like.
So the increased number of complaints could be attributed to the fact it's now easier to submit a complaint?
It could be, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
I've got a couple of queries. I love to see that you put the outcomes, because that's something I always feel very strongly about. But could we also possibly pick up any learning issues from when we get complaints? Because it's important for us to know that we've actually learned when, if it's not upheld, then fine. But if there is, it's really handy to have the learning issues, even briefly, just reported. And the other one is, I'm a bit surprised, no whistleblowing. Does that, in my mind, does that raise the question about, is the system working effectively? So have we reviewed the system recently on whistleblowing?
So yeah, to address your first point, then we've recently introduced we've called it a learning log within People Services, which covers all of these types of casework outcomes. So we can absolutely start showing not just what learning's been captured, but actually how that's been embedded and what evaluating the impact of that. So we can include that in the next report. And then your second question, sorry, I've forgotten what it was then. Yeah, sorry, whistleblowing. Thank you. It's no, yeah, thanks. Bye. It's relative. I mean, that policy has been in existence for a while, but it's relatively recently that was refreshed and republished. In my gut feel is that staff, when they do have a concern to raise, they're using the internal mechanisms available to them. They're either addressing that directly with line managers or senior managers, or they're raising informal or formal grievances. And if there's any indication around anything that's raised with us that we think there may be a whistleblowing element, we do of course involve General Counsel Amanda we would discuss that, but nothing that has crossed our paths.
Whistleblowing also has a certain definition, so a lot of circumstances don't meet the threshold for the whistleblowing, which is probably why they become a grievance or a complaint instead. So that might account for it. So whistleblowing only kicks in certain circumstances, but I'm comfortable that we have reviewed that and republished that very recently. So I think it's actually a good sign that we haven't had any whistleblowing.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but the other side of that is that if the system appears not to actually work, then people won't use the system. So it's, there's got to be a balance there about how it's used. But bearing in mind that, we've had complaints around the fire authority in the past about, we've made issues and they've not been dealt with effectively. It is something in terms of the culture of the organisation that are elected members involved in the whistleblowing process?
They can be, Chair. There's various directions as to who you can raise a whistleblowing complaint with. It can be a line manager or a director, but if it's about anyone at a higher level, they can come directly to the clerk and monitoring officer. But also, for example, if someone wanted to whistleblow against me, it does say that you can contact elected members directly. So basically, it's for the person making the complaint to determine who they feel comfortable raising that whistleblowing with. So there's not one formula that fits all circumstances under whistleblowing. It's for the complainer who's raising the whistleblowing to decide who they want to direct that to, and the policy is very clear about that. But it does include elected members. So if they felt so uncomfortable that they wanted to go outside of the organisation to the governing body, they can do that, absolutely.
Right, so I think, anybody got any further questions? Merci.
Thank you for your presentation. I got two questions. The first one is the staff, the one that you updated was technical side. Is this like a breach like GDPR or like breach of service values? Is there any like complaints training every month with the member of staff receiving if they got like these complaints issues? And the second question, what's the time scale of the complaints response, or the external or the internal complaints?
So to address the first question, is that more around the follow-up, do you mean in terms of learning from these issues? Is that what you're referencing? Yeah, so if there's any outcome from those, sometimes that might be informal action, which would be, might include development and training for that individual to raise their awareness of specific policies they may have breached or particular areas of legislation that have caused that concern. So that would be an example of how that would be addressed. And if there's any wider learning for wider training, then we would be taking that on board as well. And then, sorry, could you repeat your first question?
Yes, there was the timescales of response to the complaints.
Can you press
Sorry, the complaints here, the timescales response, whether external or internal.
So the external complaints timescales, in terms of the 15 received in 5.6, they're addressed. The policy for that is that the complainant is responded to within 28 days, so that they receive an outcome. It might be occasionally that we notify them that that's still in progress and we need a bit more time to have a full response to give them, but they will certainly hear within 28 days of submitting their complaint. And then in terms of internal complaints, grievances and matters that are raised, there's no set time frames around that, but we will of course always do it as quickly as we possibly can for everybody's benefit. Some more complex cases take a little bit longer. From historical learning, that often those particularly discipline cases take too long, which is one of the reasons we've introduced the Professional Standards Board, because that's enabled us to maintain the pace of those investigations, ensure there's adequate resource and capacity around it, so that those complaints and issues can be resolved as quickly as possible.
So receiving complaints both internal and external, 28, that's fine. But acknowledging the time scale, when you receive this complaint, acknowledging to the parts responding, is there any time scale? Like 5 working days or 10 working days?
Yeah, for internal complaints, yeah, we will always acknowledge it within 5 working days and, yeah, take it from there. In terms of what then steps then need to take place, it might take a little bit longer, but we'll try and do that within 7 days. Thank you.
Right, so can I just ask Amanda and Alison whether the Professional Standards Board, could we request them to look at the whistleblowing policies again? I mean, would that be, you said you had looked at it fairly recently, but is that...
I think members actually have reviewed it fairly recently. I can't remember in which, I think it was considered at the Constitution Working Group, and then it was presented to full fire authority for sign-off from memory. So it would be strange for it to go back down to the Professional Standards Board if it's already been looked at. Or are you talking about the process of advertising it and complaining? Is that what you're focusing on? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a different point. So I think the whistleblowing is good because it's been scrutinised and approved. So we can certainly take away your request that Professional Standards Board maybe looks at the process by which you raise a whistleblowing complaint. Is that
Yes,
what you're...
yeah, that's
Super. I think we'll note that and take that away.
I'm sure when it's been raised, it's dealt with correctly. It's just whether the members of staff actually feel able to do that. That should be able to make. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for the report. Very full.
And it covers a vast topic, really, and we'll move forward then to the next one, which was, I think was, if I remember rightly, the internal audit contract. Yes. So that's you again, Helen. This is your meeting,
Yes.
isn't it?
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. So this one starts at page 141 of your pack.
Sorry, can I just ask a question before you do? We've got our current here. Should they declare an interest and leave at this stage?
Amanda?
The governance question.
I don't think we need to at this stage, no, because we're just simply saying that the contract's coming to an end and what were the next steps. I don't think there's any... I mean, in due course, there will be a formal tender process, which they will be invited to participate in.
Sorry, I'm being a bit mischievous, I think.
That's it. I mean, we can withhold from answering questions just to avoid any perceived conflict.
Thank you.
Thank you. So starting at page 141 of your packs, this report has one recommendation, which is to commission the service leadership team to start a tender process for the appointment of a new internal auditor to be appointed by the 1st of April 26. As you'll be aware, the authority requires the provision of an internal audit service to support the effective management and governance of functions of Avon Fire and to ensure the authority's statutory responsibilities. The contract for our current internal audit provider is due to expire on the 31st of March 26. No further extensions are available under the current agreement, therefore a procurement exercise is necessary to award a new contract. The tender process is anticipated to take place at the beginning of September, with a contract award planned for December, allowing for a handover period if needed before the start date of the 1st of April. Benchmarking of the number of audit days across other fire and rescue services has begun, and it is shown that our current provision of 50 days is below average. The current level of provision has taken budget considerations into account, along with the relative size of the organisation, and has been deemed an adequate provision by our current internal audit supplier, as Matthew's mentioned earlier, to provide an informed annual opinion. However, there is a consideration for SLT as part of this process. One of the considerations will be whether the 50 days is sufficient to meet the authority's governance and assurance needs, and whether the service wishes to align with sector benchmarking. And also, as previously mentioned, considering also capacity to take on actions that come out of internal audit, ongoing budget considerations, and the additional external scrutiny that we have from HMICFRS and so on. So I did have one further question which we haven't addressed yet from the independent member, which is what mechanisms will be in place to evaluate the effectiveness of the new provider in the first year. So key performance indicators will be developed as part of the procurement process and included in the invitation to tender and ultimately form part of the contract. These will include measures of timeliness, quality, accuracy, staff feedback and so on, and a monthly contract management meeting will be held to discuss feedback. That concludes my presentation unless members have any questions.
Tim, you want to ask your question now?
Well, I mean, it is partly covered, of course, within this report about whether or not it needs to increase from 50 days. I guess my question is, who's going to make that decision?
So that will be a decision for service leadership team as part of this procurement process. When we present the procurement sourcing plan to them, which will be in July, I'll include any benchmarking data that we have. We have some, but I'll continue to gather as much of that as I can, and then propose, X amount of days will be X amount of cost, and then that will be for them to consider.
My next question would be the length of the contracts. The previous one was a 3-year contract with an option of a 1-year extension. What is the proposal for the new contract? I guess my question being is, that's quite short in length, especially if people need to come in, understand a new authority, get that information. Would there be financial benefit in increasing the length of the contract?
I think that is a fairly standard amount of time that we've done previously. I'd need to check with our procurement team as to what the normal, I don't know what's allowed within various procurement routes, so I can certainly go away and ask that question.
Thank you. I mean, just generally wider for the committee, I think we should consider whether we wish to give an indication whether we think there should be additional days or not, to at least give a steer to officers. I wait to hear the debate. I remain, but I would like to hear what others think.
I was sat here looking across at Verity because internal audit works very closely with the finance function, and I suppose that the report quite clearly says, in actual fact, we're below average, and under those circumstances, are we actually then getting value for money from the internal auditors, or are we actually not funding it sufficiently? And I do think it could be a potential recommendation if we think it should be increased from this meeting. Is it unfair to ask you that question, Verity?
I think, like you say, benchmarking-wise, we definitely are on the low end, which we've acknowledged. I think, as RSM have referred to, they can form an opinion based on the number of days we've got. So for us, it will be a consideration around budget allowances as well as everything else. We know that we've got tight budgets, so we need to weigh up the benefits that we'd receive in terms of extending those services with the cost of that and how we balance our budgets, because we know we've got lots of challenges. But that's not to say that the cost would be the most prohibitive. If the benefits are there, which there are many benefits of having internal audit, and we can see that there are lots of opportunities in a wide variety. So it's not just finance, although there is always a finance internal audit. The majority of those audits actually cover non-financial aspects of the service. So there is a wide, but the benefit in terms of internal audit is across the whole service.
But the question is sorry, I'll come on to you in a second, but the question is the budget sufficient? So it's not just about the relationship between you and internal auditors, but it's whether we've got the budget. We've got lots and lots and lots of pressures. Is your opinion that we actually should be spending more on this or not? Because I think this committee needs your advice on that in terms of, we know how difficult the budget's going to be. We know the gap last year and the gap this year is almost ready for us to look at.
I think this wouldn't have an impact on 25-26, the current financial year, so it would be future years. And in terms of MTFP provision, no, we haven't allocated more budget for internal audit services at this point in time, but that's not to say that we can't, but it would be at the expense potentially of something else. I think my opinion is we probably should be looking at increasing it. I don't know, we would have to look at by how much in terms of what is a comparable service or another organisation to look at, and what we think is enough for us, given potentially what our plan is in terms of the kind of things we want to be looking at, and potentially a little bit of guidance from whoever we appoint as an internal auditor in terms of how much time each of those things might need to be looked at properly. But I definitely think there's I think it would be the right thing to do to increase taking all those things into consideration, but we would have to then look at how that impacts the budget and how we balance the budget going forwards accordingly.
I think Councillor Kent's question really was around the principle of whether we actually ask for that to be reconsidered moving into the next in the commissioning process, rather than putting a direct figure on it, because I don't think we're qualified to put a figure on it. But it's whether this committee wants to actually recommend the commissioners have another look at that in terms of the budget.
David, sorry, I'll cut you across.
That's all right, thank you, Chair. So, given that the internal cost of audit is £34,000, which is 0.06% of the total budget for the Avon Fire and Rescue, I think it's excellent value of money of what we're getting, but I'm not convinced that we're showing HMCI that we're actually serious about internal audit and doing stuff. So I do think we do need to increase the number of days that we do audit stuff to make sure that we are meeting all the requirements of HMCI.
Right, so
Amanda, that's a slightly different outcome than the papers suggest, but I do think we've got two councillors that have raised that query. I think the value of internal audit is enormous, and under those circumstances I'd be supporting that, but should we actually put this to the vote, do you think?
Yes, I think what you'd need to do is propose a slight amendment to the recommendation. So I think we need to add some wording in there because I'm sort of listening to the views of the room. So at the moment it says, AJOC is asked to commission the service leadership team to start a tender process for the appointment of a new internal auditor to be appointed by 1st of April 2026. And then you need to add to that wording you're comfortable with in terms of a recommendation to SLT. And it might be the committee asks SLT to look to increase the number of audit days. Is that sufficient? To look to increase the number of audit days? Yeah. Then you're not tying their hands completely, because obviously the further research has got to be done. Sorry, Jay.
Well, no, I'm just looking at section 5.6, and it says the benchmarking data and the potential for an increase in the number of audit days will be consideration for the SLT as part of the procurement process. So do we actually need to add anything else in, given that's there? Because I think we do need to review it, but we need to be clear that we are actually getting something extra for if we have extra days.
Yes, because I mean, when we go out, obviously the prices may come in at a different price anyway, so we then have a budgetary issue. But I think the point that I was picking up from the committee was the fact that we actually do think there should be extra put into the contract moving forward. So yes, that's covered, but I think the committee was actually saying we do think it would be sensible for us to actually recommend to SLT that they actually look at that in terms, and I would probably suggest a minor change to that in terms of value for money.
So to look to increase the number of audit days to ensure, whilst ensuring value for money?
Well, so from my point of view, we need to know that what we are going for, you know, it's not just, oh, let's increase it because it's good to have, but it's only good to have if it's actually effective. So it is value for money, and if there are other things that are not, that could be covered that are not, so being very clear about what the outcome is for the extra, rather than just, oh, it's a good thing to have more.
I suppose what I was just thinking, as a committee, we can't make that decision or that recommendation. So it's only just asking them to actually have a thought about that, and just reinforcing a little bit around the report that's been submitted, which I think does indicate there is an issue there.
I think in answer to Jane's point, which I think is a really valid point, is that the process that they're going to go through with SLT, which is to give the procurement sourcing plan, will look at that level of detail. So if there are additional days, what sort of topics could be covered by those? So I think that work that you're predicting, Councillor, is definitely going to happen. It's just, we're not at that stage yet. So it's whether you want to give the steer to increase or not is the question today, really.
Yeah, that's as I see it. Thank you very much, Amanda. David?
I was going to suggest one final wrinkle to the recommendation line. At the very end, say, and report back to this committee.
Yes. So am I taking a proposal?
I just need to be clear about that, because procurement is dealt with generally by PRC, not this committee. And under the scheme of delegation, PRC only kicks in at £1 million and above. So lower level procurement decisions are made by SLT and SLB, which is why the report says it's going to SLT. It's because of the value which is attributed to this contract. So I think what we've got to be careful about is if we tie up procurement so they have to come back before they can proceed, there's a risk you're going to do. I don't know, I haven't checked the timings. So I'd have to align the date line for procurement along the committee meeting date line to make sure we don't hold the process. Helen, are you able to help me with this at all?
Yeah, off the top of my head, it would hold up procurement, because I think the next AGOT meeting is September, and we would be looking to be going out for tender in September. So to then wait until after, we'd probably be looking at October.
I suggest I might be able to, so we could take this offline in terms of I can provide an update to committee members once that procurement sourcing plan has been worked up, and we can come back to you. Are you comfortable with that, to get a bit more sort of feeling about
Yeah,
where
I
we
certainly
are?
don't want to get in the way of procurement, but the audit committee does need to be satisfied that internal audit has the resources to do the job. And I do appreciate that this is well below the threshold level for any procurement project, but it's core to the way this committee works and probably shouldn't go to PRC, should come back to this committee.
Let's not change the whole world in my first meeting. I do agree with you, but I think it is something there's a set process. But I do think this committee actually feels quite strongly that the internal audit should be actually funded a little bit better moving forward. Tim, you had your hand up.
Well, I was just going to say, obviously, the decision would be reported back to us anyway, because we would see the capacity, and I would imagine SLT have already heard our discussion here today, and putting it in writing just sort of helps give that steer. And obviously, as a committee, we can always challenge their decision if we're unhappy with it. But I think sort of knowing what is being proposed, even if it's just via email, would be reasonable. And if we have a serious issue, we can bring it back. But I think the key thing was just to give a steer from the committee today.
Thank you, Tim.
And we do have internal audit reports to every meeting, so there will be an opportunity to weave in an update for you, so it doesn't create an additional burden of a new report.
Right, so can I ask a governance question then, Amanda? Should we get a resolution and a seconder, or are we just going to pick that up in the minutes of this meeting that we've actually made that request in terms of the scrutiny?
So I think I
of the
read it
report?
out again. If
Yeah.
you're happy with the amendment, you propose it. We seek someone to second, and then we vote on it. Is everybody comfortable with that? So at the moment it says, ask AJOT to commission the service leadership team to start a tender process for the appointment of a new internal auditor to be appointed by 1st of April 2026, with the added words, to look to increase the number of audit days whilst ensuring value for money, and to report back in due course to this committee. Yes?
Right, so I propose that. So those who are against that? Any abstentions? So I'll sure we get a vote.
Vote
Those
in
in
favour?
favour?
Lovely.
Unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
that was a bit more complicated than usual.
Right, so the next item then is the corporate risk register. Thank you. And that's you, Lorna. I mentioned to Amanda at the start of the meeting, I think this is probably the most important item on the agenda in terms of impact. So over to you on this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Yes, so this report starts on page 145, item 14. Thank you. I'd like to present this paper today for your scrutiny. The Corporate Risk Register is subject to regular review by the SLT and is presented to this committee 4 times a year, twice a year in full and twice a year as an exception report. So today is the exception report, where you'll be looking at 10 risk event tables that are out of tolerance and or have had score changes since the 14th of March, when this committee reviewed the full Corporate Risk Register. As you know, each risk owner regularly monitors and reports on the risk events that sit within their remit. They consider the effectiveness of existing controls in mitigating against the likelihood and or impact of a risk event occurring in the present risk environment, which allows them to assess and advertise a current risk score. They also then provide details of planned actions or any contextual factors that are relevant to the management of their risks. If you can turn to page 146, where we will start your consideration. Paragraphs 5.1 to 5.3 provide context on the current position of corporate risks in the service, with some key pieces of work that have had a positive impact on the management of a number of corporate risks. This has now been included following a request from the March meeting, where we added in sort of a service leader's stance on the current position of corporate risk. Please rest assured that the control improvement work that I've mentioned in paragraph 5.3 is in progress. The independent member asked a question on this, and we will be including key control indicators as metrics to capture the effectiveness of controls. These are currently being embedded. I'm working with risk owners to get them added in. Many of these will be reported to the SLT in July, and further details on these, including how we'll be monitoring them and the role of digitalisation, will be coming back to this committee in September, and that will be part of the full corporate risk register. David Powell, the independent member, did send through a number of questions relating to this paper. Many of them I'll address as we go through, and then there's one I'm going to go to Verity afterwards with, but I'll alert that to you as we go through. So paragraph 5.5 starts to present the actual corporate risk events, and this particular section has the 3 with current risk scores that are out of tolerance, where they have had an increase in risk since the 14th of March. So starting with the one at the bottom of page 146, CRO 3.4, inability to deal with an MTA, a marauding terrorist attack. The risk score was increased from 13 to 18 due to the lack of progress on the national positioning regarding MTA response and training. Now, mitigations are in place, and leadership will be considering further options to ensure MTA capability can be assured, and that we have a service strategy going forward. Moving on to the top of page 147, we have CRO 4.1, failure to recruit operational staff. The risk score has been increased from 15 to 20 because of concern over vacancies later in the year due to the cancellation of the whole-time recruitment course that was planned for July. Now, the latest position section of the table refers to an upcoming transfer appointments and promotions board meeting, David Powell asked about this, and we can now report that meeting went ahead and steps have been agreed to address the increase in this risk area. So if I'll just go through those. Firstly, short-term contracts, which can actually be up for 12 months, are being offered for on-call to whole-time firefighters with the plan to create an ongoing process to support resilience. Secondly, a process is also being run for permanent transfers from on-call to whole-time. Operational leads are always careful to consider the potential knock-on impacts to on-call service delivery with that, so it is carefully monitored, but that's going to be an important step for us. And then also there's a process being opened for external transfers from other fire and rescue services to fill whole-time vacancies, and a pool of successful candidates will be created to draw from as needed over the next 12 months or so. If members have any further questions around that one, I'm sure Ali will be happy to also address that after I finish this report. Finally, in this section, the third risk event table is a pensions risk event. CR 15.3, failure to acquire accurate data from Bristol City Council. This risk event was already out of tolerance at your meeting on the 14th of March with a score of 18, but it was increased further to 20 due to concerns of identified and potential errors. Now, the latest update offers reassurance that checks are being put in place to ensure pension contributions going forward are administered accurately, and resolutions for historic issues are completed. Bristol City Council have been supportive of the payroll transfer and have provided all information needed to facilitate this process. Although it has sometimes been difficult to obtain the data to assist with retirement pension calculations, the West Yorkshire Pension Fund have now got the historic data needed to assist with future calculations, and this should no longer need to come from the payroll provider. So the independent member asked for that little bit of extra reassurance around that risk. So in due course, we would expect to see that risk event coming down in current score. Moving on to section 5.6 at the bottom of page 147, this presents the 2 risk events with current risk scores out of tolerance that were reported at these scores to this committee on the 14th of March, and they are connected, and the risk owners do work closely together on these. CR 19.2, failure to plan and deliver the medium-term financial plan efficiency savings requirements within agreed timeframes. This risk event continues to receive much scrutiny at all levels of leadership so that future savings options can be identified and progressed. Planned activities will continue to be closely monitored and reported to you via a number of different means, including obviously the risk register. Turning the page to the top of page 148, we have the financial risk event CR 20.1, lack of appropriate funding to adequately fulfil the service's aims and objectives. In relation to this risk event, the independent member has asked what the impact will be because of the funding gaps on the service's ability to meet strategic objectives and what alternative funding strategies are being considered. I will ask Verity to answer this question in a short while when I finish the paper, so I'll come back to her in a moment if that's okay. And then finally, section 5.7 summarises the 5 risk events where the risk scores have been reduced since the 14th of March meeting of this committee. Firstly, there are 3 separate risk events under CRO 5 procurement. I won't read them out all individually, but all 3 have been reduced to risk scores of 8 in April due to improvements in processes and expertise around planning, specification and knowledge. And the independent member has asked and a really important question, are there any lessons that can be learnt from these reductions and extended to other areas of strategic risk across the risk register and in the service? And the answer to this is yes, there are definitely some key takeaways from these procurement risks. To summarise, proactive planning, earlier visibility via processes such as impact assessments and business cases, they have been vital. Embedding skills in service personnel so that stakeholders have improved confidence in the processes and what they're doing, and sort of more proactive and more embedded cross-functional collaboration. That's been maximised around procurement and across the service, and I think those are lessons that we can take elsewhere. So that was a good question, thank you. And then finally, at the top of page 149, are 2 separate risk events under CR13, loss of availability to IT infrastructure and services. So CR13.3, inability to recover from a whole or partial failure of infrastructure, and CR13.5, extended loss of availability to local area network or LAN. Both have been reduced in risk score due to the completion of the LAN Refresh project, which was a significant milestone in the ICT strategy and a really key, important piece of work. So that concludes my presentation of the Corporate Risk Register Exception Report today. Before I open up for questions, I'd like to go over to Verity to address that question that was asked by David Powell around CR 20.1. So the question was, what impact will the identified funding gaps have on the service's ability to meet its strategic objectives, and what alternative funding strategies are being considered? Thank you, Verity.
Thank you, Lorna. So I think to start with, I was going to mention how the current medium-term financial plan is built. So that medium-term financial plan is built based on the assumption that we are going to incur all the costs we need to incur to deliver against our strategic objectives. So, of course, if we are going to find a way to balance our budget, and that means cutting some costs, there may well be an impact on meeting our strategic objectives. However, we don't know what that looks like yet. And as I mentioned in one of my previous answers, there's an exercise ongoing looking at how we are going to make those savings to balance the budget and ensuring that we've made made all the right considerations, so impact assessed every option so that we know what that impact will be. It's also a case of potentially just reprioritising objectives as well. So a good example of that is the capital programme. So the capital programme puts quite a significant amount of pressure on the revenue budget because of the borrowing that's required and the cost associated with that. So something that's happening at the upcoming capital steering group next month is re-looking at prioritisation of all the projects within that programme to see if potentially they could be removed, rephased, delayed slightly, so that we can start looking at the impact that might have on relieving our the pressures in our revenue budget. So prioritisation will also be a key thing to look at. But the second part of the question was really about what alternative funding strategies are being considered. And I would say our hands are tied a little bit in terms of funding. So the majority of our funding, so around 60%, comes from council tax. So we obviously get given a council tax referendum limit. That's the maximum that we can increase our council tax without going to referendum. Around 30% of our income comes from grant funding. About 8% is business rates. And then we only have around 2% of income that we class as other income, which is income that really we might have a little bit more control over. So it's a really small proportion of our overall budget. And it will be things like investment income, rental income. We get some income from feed-in tariffs on solar panels and things like that. So it's all quite minimal. There is scope to look at some alternative income streams. Things like, for example, charging for some of our services. The Full Fire Authority receives a paper every year that talks about the kind of services we are able to charge for. We don't tend to charge for many of those in reality, so we could look at increasing that, for example, but in the grand scheme of the budget, that isn't going to really shift the dial in terms of our ability to balance the budget. So there are some things we're looking at, and the other thing is looking at investment income and maximising our investment income. We've recently appointed Treasury Management Advisors, primarily to help us make sure we make the right borrowing decisions in terms of timing and duration of that borrowing, but also to help us manage if we do have excess cash or free cash that we don't need for a short period of time, whether we can lock that away and try and generate a little bit more in terms of investment income. But all of those things are relatively small. The other thing in terms of funding that we do tend to have a look at, the Chief Fire Officer will engage with local members of Parliament to make sure that our funding pressures are known. So we regularly write to local MPs, and we did write to a letter recently outlining the impacts of how the 25-26 budget settlement had impacted us. So we have had an increase in council tax referendum limit this year, but we had some other grant income taken away, and actually the impact of that, given the pay awards, meant that we had nothing. We only had funding really to fund pay awards and nothing else. So it was just kind of to try and reiterate the impact that those funding decisions have had on us. So that kind of liaison with members of Parliament and trying to kind of lobby to see if we can get more funding happens, but you know, the ability for us to make significant changes is limited there. And I think so. That's kind of my answer. We do our best with funding, but to quite a significant extent, our hands are tied.
Thank you, Verity. That's great. So I don't know if anyone else has got any questions.
I've got a couple. I think it's great that David, having asked the questions, because great risk with risk appetite is that it's actually dealt with by you rather than the operational officers. So I think it's great that the questions have been asked and, you know, Verity's answered them, and I think that's really good. So I've then got a question, I think, for Luke, which around the one around the failure to recruit operational staff. It raises a big issue in my mind around the health and safety of the crews that work for us. And I think we do need to be making sure that we actually are covering that as effectively as possible. Within the script, it's fairly brief, but it is a major issue, I think, if there's ever an event, and we ever, hopefully never fail, but if there was an issue and there was scrutiny, whether we can actually defend that particular risk that we've got there, which I think is a major risk for not only the public, but also our own staff.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand that we generally carry a vacancy factor across the whole organisation, but specifically to operational response. With changes to the pension scheme, it's sometimes very, very hard to predict who's going to retire and when they're going to retire. So we're always looking at it in 3-month segments through a meeting called Transfers and Promotions Board. And generally, we make a prediction on historical data about who we think are going to retire over the next 12 months and when they're going to retire. And then we look at when we need to have a training school. Do we need to consider external transfer, or do we need another method to bring on-call members across? We made a decision earlier in the year, or probably late last year, around postponing a training school that was due to start in June this year. We have a vacancy factor at the moment of around 16 across operational resource, which is not hugely significant, but it's still 16 people that we haven't got. So what are we going to do to mitigate that risk that we've got at the moment? So we've put a number of factors in place, and we're working with Ali and People Services to try to close that gap of 16. So in the short term, we've got 8 people from on-call who have just been successful and are coming across to become whole-time colleagues, so change the contract for them. That's going to fill 8 of our vacancies. We've also got 24 people following an external advert for qualified firefighters from other services to join us. Now, they're going through a promotion process, and if they're a crew or watch manager, they'll go through a command assessment as well to provide us the assurance that they're competent. And there are pros and cons to both routes, if you like. So if we take a recruit and apprentice, it takes up to 2 years to get them fully competent, but we can shape them into the Avon way of doing things, which is a real positive. But they sometimes lack those skills initially of driving and all the specialist skills we need them to have. We've got these 24 people externally, and we're really focusing on the skills we're short of. So drivers, as an example, we want all of those that are going to come across in the external process to be qualified drivers. So they're filling a skills gap for us as well, which is then reducing our risk for us. So our next training school that we've got penciled in is for March next year. A decision is going to be made, I think it's August, Ali, I think TAP's in August. So we're going to look at that. But what we need to do is balance that decision out with our efficiency and savings, because we need to produce an amount of savings, and that could be headcount, depending on what options are chosen. And then do we need that training school in March next year, or do we need to postpone it depending on the headcount of the organisation? So it's a fine balance all the time, but we are mitigating and managing that risk as best as possible.
Thank you, Luke. That's very full. I suppose as a councillor, I'm just worried in terms of the impact on our staff. If we're undermanned, if we go to any event, that there could be that risk. I mean, I come from the world of education and health, where there's agency workers that you can call on. I mean, do we have any arrangements with agency or bank ex-employees who perhaps could be pulled in? I mean, it just strikes me that there's an issue there that we've got to, as a committee, got to be interested about in terms of that.
Yeah, so what we have, how we run this service on a day-to-day basis is through our crew and our resource planning unit, and we have something called standard and minimum crewing. Right. Because we've got a number of vacancies at the moment, we very rarely hit standard at this moment in time, but we always try to hit minimum crewing levels. Right. And if we can't do that, then we look at our resources, and we've got something called a degradation plan. That degradation plan then allows a decision to be made on that particular day or night shift to look at, can we remove an appliance from service with the least amount of impact in a different area, defined sometimes on data, and see what impact that has. Within our control teams, we have not agency staff, but we call them resilience team. Right. So they come in if they're short in our control team, because that's a very specific skill set. Unfortunately, we don't have bank staff, or we can't use agency staff for firefighters. Definitely not, because they haven't got the skills we need, and that would present us and the public with a huge risk in terms of health and safety. So what we do rely on is an overtime system for firefighters who are off duty to come and backfill any vacancies that we do have, and that predominantly works well across the service.
Tim?
Right, thanks. That was very interesting. I was just going to say, I think it is important also just thinking about the future of the fire service to make sure we do have some form of new regular recruitment going forward, because presumably demographically that group of people will probably be slightly younger than those who are transferring, and also proportionally might be slightly more reflective of the population, as in traditionally the fire service operation was very male dominated, and obviously we want to be more reflective of our population where we can be and get the best firefighters from across the board. I did want to just actually follow up a completely separate thing there, if that was okay. I wanted to follow up, and now my screen goes blank because it resets every 3 seconds. I wanted to follow up the business of CR03.4, the MTA, marauding terrorist attack, which sounds horrific. I mean, obviously the chances of this happening are very small, but the potential impact could be very great. I wanted to sort of try to understand a little bit more, though, about, so the increase in evaluation of potential impact is due to the lack of progress on the national position regarding MTA response and training. Is anyone able to sort of expand that a little bit more? Because this seems to then, if it's affecting us, it sounds like it would be affecting other fire services as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing to get across is this area, specifically Bristol actually, is a tier 1 site, which is a higher risk site to other areas in the UK. Just going on to the national issue, if you like, this is around the firefighter role map. So the representative body, mainly the Fire Brigades Union, feel that responding to a marauding terror attack is not within the current role map of a firefighter. So that is a national negotiation that needs to take place, and conversations are happening. What we've got in 2 different regions within the UK, and they ironically both have mayors, so Greater Manchester and London, who have also both had terror incidents. They have come to a local agreement with their mayors and their chief and their staff around providing additional pay to carry out that response function. We're not there. We're discussing it locally with our FBU reps, but of course they've also got a steer from their National Exec Committee. So we are very, very close to introducing a new policy and process and upskilling people, which I could probably talk to if we go to an exempt session, but not within the confines of this meeting at the moment.
Thanks. So without trying to go into too much detail into this, what you're saying to me is that we're progressing quite well locally in trying to find a resolution. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. So March's SLT and area manager was provided a piece of work to say we need to boost our capability in this area, and I've already seen an email chain to say that work is progressing really, really quickly, so we're hoping to bolster that in the very, very near future.
Any other questions, anybody? I've got one
final thing to add, because I think this is really, really important document. Can I just say that there's no predictions on this, because where I've dealt with these systems in the past, we hope that will come down to, you know, in a certain period of time and a progress report. This just, if you like, highlights what the risks are. It doesn't highlight what the solutions are. And it's just something, I don't know whether that's ever been asked for by the independent member before, but it just strikes me that this system could in actual fact give us a little bit more information in terms of the major risks that we're looking at, because over 20 I mean, those are really, really significant risks for Avon Fire Authority. So I sit here as a councillor saying, yes, but what's the solution? Yes, we can go off and ask the professionals at the meeting, but it just strikes me that it'd be handy to have when can that be brought down, and what sort of timescale are we talking about, and the reality of it.
I think we can certainly, I mean, I'm in Lorna's hands, certainly take that away. We did add, on request from councillors, the final column, which was trend line, so we could see the sort of the trend.
But it doesn't show a dotted line.
No, but I think in many ways, rather than create much more work for Lorna, who I'm conscious does an excellent job already, so maybe we could seek to add to that a dotted line or something to indicate where we're hoping it's going to go. But it will be for the risk managers, because obviously Lorna just collates this information to give her that prediction and the basis on which they formed it. So I don't know if it's an easy ask, but we can certainly look at it.
Yes, but I suppose what I was trying to say is if Verity wasn't here, we wouldn't have got those, or Luke wasn't. It just strikes me that the system probably could be developed a little bit more in the future, and I would welcome if that happens. But that's a personal comment that I've made today rather than the chair.
Just to reassure that I think you'll see more of that when you get the full corporate risk register in September, because we work very much around the risk appetite and tolerance levels, which we present in sort of riskometers, where we're trying to get into the green when it comes to the current risk score, and we link up the planned actions that the risk owners present, which have dates attached to them, which then is about working to get into that risk appetite zone. So I mean, in terms of, it would work well, I think, sort of the concept of the dotted lines with regards to ones that we know are going to definitely be coming down in score soon, like, for example, the pension accurate data one, CR 15.3. You know, I mentioned we would be probably looking to that to reduce that, and it would be nice for you to have an indication of when that would happen. Others, we might be able to indicate, well, it's going to stay at this score for a little bit longer, with this happening and this happening. So it is something I always ask risk owners to do when they're updating the full risk register, which they're doing at the moment, is to indicate dates around the planned actions and the impact that they're going to have on potentially the current risk score. But what we've also been seeing over the last year is risk owners actually using the corporate risk register much more dynamically and increasing and decreasing scores with much more sort of support and transparency, and using it more effectively like that, not just a tick box exercise or worrying about what the implications are for increasing it. So we do need to manage it dynamically, but I think you're absolutely right, there would be ones that we could give an indication at when it would be coming back down. Yeah. Thank you.
And it also raises the corporate appetite for saying, well, that risk is a high risk, but we accept that as an organisation that's going to continue. And it's you know, that's a question really for SLT, but as councillors we're sitting here getting this report, and it just struck me that there was probably, it could be developed a little bit more in the future, but I'll leave that entirely up to you to decide what you provide to us. So thank you very much.
So can I just
ask then, has anybody got any questions they want to ask on the exempt risk register? So we won't go into exempt session then, thank you. So then we'll thank you very much for your report, and as I say, it's really important. So the next meeting is Friday the 19th of September, yes, and that's going to be in a very nice location of Bath and North East Somerset in Keynsham. So that's going to make it very easy for some people, but not necessarily everybody else. The Keynsham community space is a short walk from the station to there, and it's nicely air conditioned as well. I was in a meeting yesterday, I was frozen, and everybody said it was really hot, but I was frozen. So we'll do that. So we won't go into exempt session, and I'd like to thank everybody for your tolerance for me and the chair today. I think it's been a really excellent meeting, and I'll bring it to a close at this point, and thank you very much. The video will now end.